She never spoke much, but she saw everything. The girl sat with her knees drawn to her chest at the far end of the compound, beneath the crooked pawpaw tree that bore fruit only on one side. Her eyes followed things, small things, forgotten things. A red thread caught on a bush. The way ants moved in a straight line after the rain. The exact number of tiles cracked on the back porch, 11. People walked past her as though she were mist in the morning, there and gone before they registered her presence. She had a name, of course. Everyone does. But no one used it much anymore. Not since her mother died. It happened fast. A cough. Then another. Then the way her mother's strong arms grew weak and her voice, once warm as boiled yam, turned into whispers no one could hear unless they pressed their ears close. Her father did not press his ear close. Instead, he pressed his lips to another woman's hand before the soil over his wife's grave had hardened. That woman, her stepmother now, came with a crispness to her. Starched blouses. A voice like she'd practiced it in front of a mirror. Smiles that never reached her eyes. And rules. So many rules. Don't sit under that tree. Don't walk barefoot on the porch. Don't laugh too loud. Don't stare. Don't look too long. Don't eat unless told. Don't speak unless asked. And even when the girl followed every rule, even when she folded herself small enough to fit into the gaps between conversations, her stepmother's eyes still tightened every time they met hers. "She's a strange one," she heard her say once. "Doesn't talk. Just watches like a ghost." That's how the nickname started. Ghost Girl. Whisper Child. Shadow. Her father, well, he wasn't cruel. Just busy. Always gone when he was needed. Always tired when he came home. If he noticed how the girl flinched when her stepmother passed by, he never said. If he saw that her plates held only the dregs, the bones, the broken bits of yam while his wife and stepchildren ate their fill, he said nothing. If he wondered why the girl's clothes wore out twice as fast, why her shoes were always half a size too small, he never asked. She learned early that words were wasted in that house. The first few times she tried to speak, her stepmother would interrupt. "What are you mumbling now?" Or worse, her stepbrother would laugh. "Say it again, ghost. Let's hear the wind talk." And her father would just sigh, long and low, and rub his temples like he wished he could disappear into silence too. So the girl stopped trying. Instead, she learned how to listen. She memorized the rhythm of her stepmother's footsteps, the squeak of the back door hinge, the way the floorboard groaned in the hallway at night. She could tell which of her stepbrothers was approaching just by the weight of their steps. She knew when her stepmother had been drinking. Her perfume changed then, mixed with something sharp and sour. She noticed when food spoiled in the back of the cupboard before anyone else did. She saw the rat holes forming beneath the stove. She saw when her father's hands started to tremble at the end of the day, and how he pressed them into his pockets like secrets. In school, she sat in the second row, not too close to be noticed, not far enough to be forgotten. She got good grades but never spoke in class. The teachers gave up asking questions after a while. Some called her bright. Others troubled. One whispered to another that she might be mute, but she wasn't. She just saved her voice like an emergency match, only to be struck when the fire was worth it. Children can be cruel, but they are also easily bored. At first they poked fun at her silence. Then they moved on, finding louder targets. She remained, a quiet fixture like a tree no one bothers to climb. Her notebooks were always full, her handwriting neat. She doodled in the corners of her papers, tiny eyes, clouds with teeth, houses with legs. At home she kept to the corners. She waited until the others were done eating before slipping into the kitchen to scrape what was left. She learned which pots her stepmother didn't check often, and hid pieces of bread or banana peels in them for later. Her stepbrothers ignored her mostly, unless they were bored or angry or wanted someone to blame. Then they remembered she existed. That she was convenient. That she had no voice that would matter. But still she didn't cry. She didn't shout. She didn't tell. She collected things. Not objects but moments. A bird landing exactly on the fence post. The way the neighbor's baby always stopped crying when the wind blew from the north. The way light fell on her real mother's photograph, the one her stepmother tried to hide in a drawer. She rescued it one afternoon, careful not to be seen, and slipped it under her mattress. The girl in the picture smiled with wide eyes and a full mouth. The girl with the silent eyes wondered if she'd ever smile like that again. Her bedroom was a room in name only. It had a bed frame missing slats, a mattress thinner than memory, and a curtain instead of a door. She liked it though. At night, when everyone slept, the curtain fluttered in the wind, and moonlight drew lines across her floor like messages only she could read. Once, during a storm, her stepmother forgot to lock the window in the living room. Rain poured in, soaking the carpet and warping the wood. Her father shouted, her stepmother blamed the girl. She was whipped with a branch until her skin sang. She didn't scream. Not once. But that night, while everyone else slept, she took the warped piece of floorboard and hid it under her bed. A reminder. A record. A story only she understood. When she did speak, it was only to herself. Quiet, whisper thoughts under her breath. She doesn't know I saw her take money from Baba's wallet. He doesn't know I heard him crying in the shed. They don't know I've been saving every coin I find. She had a small tin box, once used for biscuits, now filled with coins. Not much, but growing. Her plan wasn't fully formed. But she had time. And she had eyes that saw. Eyes that waited. Sometimes when no one was home, she danced. Just a little. A sway. Step. Not because she was happy, but because her body remembered her mother's lullabies, the ones sung while she plaited her hair and stroked her back. She didn't remember all the words, but the rhythm remained, like a heartbeat passed down. She spoke to her mother in those moments. I'm still here. They haven't broken me. I see everything. She found her voice once, in a moment of near-forgotten bravery. Her stepmother accused her of stealing a pair of earrings. She hadn't. But the woman raised her hand anyway, and for the first time the girl stepped back and said, "No. Just one word. Just one." It landed in the room like a stone in still water. Her father looked up. Her stepbrothers froze. Her stepmother's hand stayed in the air for a second too long, like she couldn't believe what she'd heard. Then everything returned to normal. The slap still came. But that "no" stayed echoing somewhere in the girl's ribs. It felt like fire. It felt like the beginning of something. Later that night, as she lay beneath her thin blanket, the biscuit tin under her pillow, the warped wood still tucked at the base of her bed, she whispered to herself, "I will speak again." She wasn't sure when, or how, or what it would cost. But she knew this much: not all silences are empty. Some are waiting. And hers? Hers was learning how to roar. The morning was dry, the kind that crackled beneath your skin and made shadows stretch long and slow. The compound smelled of ash and wet iron, as if the sky had rained rust in the night. The girl woke early as always, before the birds found their courage. She swept the steps, rinsed the calabashes, wiped the stools with a rag that had once been her favorite dress, a faded blue now more dust than dye. No one asked her to. No one thanked her. But she knew what silence demanded. Her stepmother sat beneath the hibiscus tree, her arms folded like questions that refused to be answered. She sipped her millet tea loud and slow, eyes fixed on the road. She had been watching since dawn, waiting for someone. The girl sensed the tension thickening in the air, the kind that presses down just before thunder dares to speak. But still no one said a word to her. Her father sat with his feet up, snoring through his teeth, a bottle still cupped like a newborn against his chest. He hadn't spoken to the girl since the month turned, not with words. Only with looks. Only with the impatient gesture of a hand, or the lash of his tongue across her back when she moved too slowly. By the time the sun touched the roof, a tall man in brown robes entered the compound. He walked without hurry, carrying a staff carved with birds and teeth. His eyes were so light they nearly looked silver. The girl stood still, broom in hand, as the man nodded once at her stepmother and waited to be offered a seat. No one introduced him. No one explained. But the girl felt something shift when he entered, like a wind curling under a closed door. "Bring water for the feet," the stepmother said sharply. The girl obeyed, fetching a bowl and pouring water from the clay jar that leaked if you tilted it too far. She set it near the man's feet, then stood back, waiting. "No. Not like that," her stepmother said. "You think we wash our guests like animals?" The girl blinked. "I brought clean water." "Do you have a tongue?" her father snapped, now awake, his voice raw with drink. "Then listen when spoken to." The girl shrank. The elder did not move. He watched, expressionless, as the stepmother rose from her seat and walked over to the girl. "You will clean his feet," she said, voice cold. "With your hair." For a moment everything stopped. The wind stopped. The birds fell silent. Even the flies seemed to hover, waiting. The girl thought maybe she hadn't heard right. Maybe it was a cruel joke or a test. But the stepmother's face gave no room for doubt. She began, but her father's growl rumbled through the air like a storm beginning. "She thinks she's too good," he slurred. "After all this house gives her, she can't honor a guest?" The girl looked to her stepmother, but the woman only nodded toward the ground. "Kneel." And something in her knees gave way. Maybe it was habit. Maybe it was fear. She didn't know. But she sank, one slow inch at a time, until her bones touched the dirt and the bowl of water shimmered before her like a mocking moon. Her hair was thick and long, knotted at the ends from too many nights of restless sleep. She unwrapped the scarf around her head and let it fall, the strands slipping down her back like rope lowered into a well. She leaned forward, her stomach tight, her hands trembling. Her forehead nearly touched the elder's feet. They were old feet, cracked at the heel, thick with the yellow of years. The water rippled around his ankles. Still he said nothing. Still he watched. She dipped the end of her hair into the water and dragged it gently across the top of his foot. Once. Twice. She bit her lip to stop it from quivering. 3 times. The elder remained still, but the girl thought she saw something flicker in his pale eyes, not shame, not mercy, but something stranger. A kind of noticing. Her father laughed, a short cruel sound. She's learning, he said. Finally. The girl's scalp began to ache from the angle. Her hair dragged over stone and skin, catching on calluses, soaking in the dirt. The water grew murky. Her cheeks flushed with heat. Not from shame, not anymore, but from something deeper, something hardening. She had washed the feet of goats. She had scraped dung from the threshold with her hands. But this was something else. This was the kind of obedience that broke you in two and left the smaller half breathing. This was not about honor. This was about power. About making her forget who she was. She finished one foot, moved to the next. Her neck throbbed. Her eyes burned. Her stepmother stood above her, arms crossed. When the bowl was nearly empty, and the girl's hair matted and dripping, the elder finally spoke. Enough. The voice was quiet, but it held weight, like stone on wet cloth. She lifted her head slightly. Not to meet his eyes. Just to breathe. The elder looked down at her, then at the stepmother. She obeys too quickly, he said. That is dangerous. Her father blinked. What do you mean? But the elder did not explain. He simply stood, shook the water from his robe and left without a backward glance. Her stepmother hissed and turned away. Her father cursed and spat. But the girl remained kneeling. She stared at the bowl. At the pieces of herself floating inside it. And she felt something sharp, like a thorn, rise in her chest. Not anger. Not grief. Recognition. She was no longer the girl who woke before the birds. No longer the girl who flinched when silence entered a room. Something had shifted in her, not broken, not yet, but shifted enough to leave a crack. She stood slowly, her legs numb. She did not ask for a cloth. She did not reach for the scarf. She let her hair hang wet and tangled. She walked to the back of the compound, to the tree where the chickens liked to hide. She sat there for hours, letting her hair dry under the sun. The next day no one spoke of it. But when she passed the mirror hanging crooked on the kitchen wall, she saw her reflection, and for the first time, it did not look away. And for the first time she did not look small. It became routine before she even realized it. That first time had broken something open, a wall or a rule or perhaps just the illusion of one. After that morning her hair stopped belonging to her. It became a rag, a broom, a cloth meant for scrubbing men's feet and floors. It was no longer the black river her mother once combed with oil and whispered dreams into. Now it was a weapon, not hers but theirs. Used against her. Dragged across mud-caked ankles, blistered soles and spilled palm wine. The village men laughed sometimes. Sometimes they didn't. Sometimes they sat in silence while she worked, their feet twitching, their eyes elsewhere. Sometimes they looked at her like she was a curiosity. Other times like she was nothing at all. The stepmother called it training. Training your pride to kneel. Training your hair to listen. Training your fingers for the marriage floor. Each time it was said with the same tight-lipped smile. As though humiliation was a blessing in disguise, a lesson only the fortunate could be trusted to receive. As though the girl should be grateful. She washed the feet of elders, hunters, visitors, traders, even the young men from across the stream who came to borrow tools and never returned them. She learned to do it with her face a blank cloth. She learned not to flinch when the men shifted or cleared their throats or passed remarks. She learned to keep her eyes low and her voice lower. Her scalp grew sore from the tug of it. The weight of wet hair collecting soot and sweat like a curse. The dust of the compound seemed to rise whenever she passed, clinging to her feet, her arms, her mouth. No matter how hard she scrubbed, the floor was never clean. There was always a new layer waiting. A new film of red earth that settled like an insult. She scrubbed it anyway. Every morning before the house stirred, she fetched water from the back well, careful not to splash. She tore pieces from the same rag to wipe with, bits of old skirts and sleeves they no longer let her wear. Her fingers blistered from scrubbing clay tiles with soap that stung like salt. The blisters popped. Then bled. Then hardened. She didn't wrap them. No one told her to. No one cared. The stepmother began inspecting the floors. You missed the corner. This spot still smells. Did your mother teach you nothing? That last one always made her still for a moment. But she said nothing. She'd learned by now that silence could be sharper than reply. So she held her tongue and scrubbed harder. Bent deeper. Let her hair hang low even when it caught on broken tile or stray thorns carried in from the yard. The worst were the rainy days. The compound turned to a soup of water, earth, and old leaves. The men came in with soaked legs and dripping sandals. They tracked the outside world across the very parts of the floor she had just cleaned. They didn't remove their shoes. Some didn't even speak. Just looked at her, nodded once toward the bowl, and waited. She didn't know their names anymore. She didn't ask. They came and went like wind, always passing through, never staying long enough to matter. There were jokes among them sometimes. She's got strong hair, look how it scrubs. Marry her and you'll never need a housemaid. Once, someone reached down to touch her cheek as she knelt. She didn't flinch, but something in her eyes must have answered back because he withdrew, coughed, and left without his plantains. When her hair got too matted, the stepmother stood over her and cut chunks off with a knife. Not gently. Not to shape. Just to shorten. Just to tame. The strands fell like feathers soaked in oil, too heavy to drift. Don't think long hair means beauty, the woman said. Yours is only useful when it listens. Her father didn't say much anymore. He grunted. He drank. He slept. Sometimes he watched from the corner of his eye and muttered something under his breath. But never to her. Never for her. One day the girl heard the children in the neighboring compound whispering. That's the one who uses her hair on old men. She eats with the same hands she uses to wipe their feet. My mother said she's being punished. She didn't turn. She didn't cry. She just continued carrying the basin to the side of the compound and poured the blackened water into the thirsty soil. The earth sucked it up greedily as if even it couldn't stand to see waste. Her back ached constantly now. There was a ridge at the base of her spine that felt like it no longer belonged to bone. Her knees clicked when she bent. The palms of her hands were cracked like old leather. She wrapped them at night with whatever cloth she could find. But in the morning she unwrapped them again, dipped them in water, and pressed them against the earth. The house smelled of smoke and damp fabric. It was never truly clean, not even after she worked for hours. The stepmother always found something, a missed corner, a spot where dust had returned too quickly. You scrub like you don't mean it, she said once, throwing a wet rag at the girl's back. Do you think this is a game? Do you think obedience grows without water? I scrub until my fingers bleed, the girl whispered, not to be heard, but just to hear something human in the room. The rag stayed on the floor where it landed. She did not pick it up. One evening, a man came with gold rings and a voice that rasped like burned pepper. He entered with laughter but sat with silence. The stepmother offered him palm wine and a meat roll. Then she looked at the girl and gave the signal. She came forward slowly, hair already unwrapped. She knelt. The man placed his feet in the basin with a sigh. She dipped her hair. The water was cold. Halfway through he spoke. Do you dream when you sleep? She blinked. Her hair dragged across his heel. What? Your dreams, he said. Do they still come? She didn't answer. Not because she couldn't, but because she wasn't sure anymore. What were dreams to someone who never truly closed her eyes? She worked until dark and woke before dawn. Sleep came in coughs and jerks, like a child waking from a fever. The man chuckled as if he had expected her silence. They'll return. When you've learned your place, they'll return. After he left, she didn't pour the water out right away. She stared at it. Her hair floated on the surface like seaweed in a forgotten river. She reached in and touched it, not to clean, not to scrub, just to feel something soft again. She began to dread footsteps. Every new voice at the gate meant another task, another kneeling. Sometimes she tried to work slower, hoping they'd leave before she was called. But the stepmother watched her like a hawk, always ready. If you can't be beautiful, she said, at least be useful. She used that sentence like a hammer. If you can't be beautiful. The girl had forgotten what beauty was. She hadn't looked in the mirror for months. Once, while sweeping the sleeping room, she caught her reflection in a polished cooking pot. Her face startled her. Her eyes looked older than the one she remembered. Not tired, something worse. Detached. As if she were watching someone else's life unfold through her own face. The floor never stayed clean. That became the truth she lived by. No matter how she tried, the dirt returned. Like memory. Like insult. Like shadow. And one night, when her fingers throbbed so badly she couldn't uncurl them, she sat by the back door and whispered a question into the dark. Will this house ever stop needing my knees? The wind didn't answer. But a moth fluttered past her face and landed on the wet cloth in her lap. It spread its wings slowly like a sigh. Then it flew off. That was enough. Not hope, but something close. She rose, stepped barefoot across the wet floor, and began scrubbing again. Not because they told her to. Not because she believed their lessons, but because there was still a part of her, small, buried breathing, that refused to rot. The morning started the same way all others had, with the sound of metal pots clanging in the kitchen and the smell of reheated broth drifting weakly through the cracks of the house. She was already awake, of course. She often was. Sleep had long stopped being restful. The wooden beams above her bed had knots that looked like eyes, and sometimes she swore they blinked when the wind breathed too deeply. But it wasn't the wind or the beams that kept her awake, it was the knowledge that soon she would have to crawl. She listened. Her stepmother's voice was sharper today, brisk and hurried, like the snap of broom bristles brushing over something sticky. That meant someone was coming. Important, maybe. Rich, definitely. Whenever someone rich came, the rules got worse. The girl slid off her mat and quietly made her way to the back room. She had learned to move without disturbing air. Her feet never scuffed the floor. Her hands folded automatically in front of her, like someone being measured for invisibility. She didn't need to be told what to do anymore. Her body already knew. By mid-morning, the house buzzed with preparations. Her father's laughter, loud and unfamiliar, the kind he reserved for people who could advance him, echoed through the front room. She caught pieces of conversation through the walls. Trade routes, grain prices, cattle weight. None of it made sense to her, but she understood the tone. This was a man who had something to offer and something to gain. The merchant arrived draped in gold-trimmed cloth, his voice thick like syrup, sweet but slow. His hands were soft, unlike her father's, and his feet were fat, wrapped in sandals that clicked like coins when he walked. He sat cross-legged on the highest stool, swatting at invisible flies and complaining about the dust. Her stepmother called for her once. No name. Just the word girl, tossed over her shoulder like a bone to a dog. She entered silently and bowed. The merchant looked at her for a long moment, then said nothing. But the corners of his lips pulled downward like someone tasting spoiled milk. Her father cleared his throat. Her stepmother gestured with her eyes toward the merchant's feet. She dropped to her knees. The floor was already warm. It always was by midday and the dust stuck to her knees. She reached for her braid. It had been longer once, thick and smooth, but now it hung in tired knots, full of ash and tangles from the fire where she cooked and the soot where she scrubbed. She lowered her head. Her hair touched his feet. He did not move. With a slow rhythm, she began to wipe. The merchant shifted. Not in discomfort but in pleasure. Like a man being entertained. He scratched his belly then leaned forward, spitting. The sound was wet, heavy. It hit the floor just beside her hand. He smiled. There. That too. She paused. Not from confusion, she had heard him clearly. Not from shock. By now her skin had learned to grow a second layer when insult touched it. But from something else. Something inside her, small and stubborn, that clung to the idea of a boundary. That maybe, just maybe, there was a line even dirt couldn't cross. Her father grunted. That was enough. She leaned down again. The saliva was still fresh, still warm. Her hair brushed against it, absorbing it, weaving it into the strands already matted with kitchen grease and old tears. She did not gag. She did not speak. But the inside of her stomach curled like burnt paper. Her body fought it and still, she obeyed. The merchant chuckled. Obedient. That's rare these days. Her stepmother's laugh cracked open the air behind her. Maybe now she'll be useful, she said. And that word, useful, hit the girl harder than any slap. Useful. As if her worth had finally been found at the end of someone else's cruelty. As if all the hours she spent bent over flames, or grinding cassava until her hands bled, or boiling the wash water twice so it didn't burn anyone but her, didn't count. Now, after using her body as a rag, now she was finally useful. She didn't lift her head. She finished her task. She made no noise. But something quiet and sharp pressed against her chest from the inside. A thin needle of shame and another of hate. Not hate like fire, not loud, not sudden, but the slow-growing kind. The kind that plants itself like a splinter under skin and festers in silence. When she was dismissed, she stood and walked to the back room. She passed her siblings, who looked at her like one might look at a chair or a broom, objects that did what they were meant to. She passed the mirror shard hidden under the loose floorboard. She didn't stop to look. She sat alone on the mat, running her fingers through her hair. The spittle had dried now. The strands clumped together like wet threads. She tried to comb them apart with her nails, but they kept catching. She tugged, pulled, harder. A few strands came loose. She didn't flinch. In the distance she heard laughter again. Her father's voice, full of false cheer. The merchant's low and amused. Her stepmother's sharp as ever. All of them rising and falling together, like music made from someone else's humiliation. She curled her legs beneath her and stared at the wall. A small bug crawled across the floor, one of those fat-legged beetles that made no noise but left behind a trail of dust. She watched it make its slow path toward the door. She envied it. The freedom to leave, even if only to die in the grass outside. That night, while the house slept, she crawled out of bed. She found the cloth she used for cleaning, tore it into long strips and began binding her hair. Not to protect it, but to hide it. She tied it tight, tighter than comfort allowed. She wanted it invisible. She wanted no part of herself left visible enough to be used. The next morning, when her stepmother called for her, she entered with her head wrapped. "What's that?" her stepmother barked. "Lice," the girl said softly. "I didn't want to spread it." Her stepmother recoiled, waving her away. "Disgusting. Stay in the back." She nodded and returned to the shadows, where no one would ask for her, and her hair would be safe, for now. She sat by the cooking fire and listened to the chatter from the front room. But her mind was somewhere else entirely. Somewhere quiet. Somewhere where her body was hers and hers alone. Somewhere where the word useful would never be confused with obedient. And somewhere deep in her chest, the needle twisted again. Not in pain, but in promise. The mirror in the hallway, cracked long ago, still hung crooked on its rusted nail. She had stopped glancing at it weeks before. Maybe months. The reflection it gave her wasn't hers anymore, just a smudge of a girl with a face too blank to belong to anyone. A ghost in rags. She sat on the floor in the corner of the washing room, where the light didn't reach properly, where even the dust kept its silence. Her knees were raw, her hands trembling. She had scrubbed the floorboards until her knuckles had split open, until the scent of old oil and fresh blood mingled in her nose. Her hair, once a thick and shining curtain of black, now clung to her shoulders in wet strands, dull and torn. She had spent the last hour trying to untangle the dirt and ashes from it, but no matter how gently she worked, the strands came away with blood. The base of her scalp pulsed like a bruise that never faded. Every time she combed through it, more hair fell away, clumps of it like feathers from a broken bird. It had started with a single command. Just one. Use your hair, girl. Kneel. Wipe. Now it was the rule of the house. The rule of her life. And she had stopped asking why. She'd stopped the first time she asked, and the stepmother slapped her mouth so hard that the taste of blood stayed for 3 days. She'd stopped when her father looked at her like she was a stray dog that had barked too loud. She'd stopped when her cries were called noise, when her pleas were called rebellion. She had learned the difference between sound and silence. Between noise and obedience. That was when the crying stopped. Her pillow had once been wet every night, soaked in silent sobs, turned over and over again until both sides bore witness to the grief. But then the sobs dried up, not because she healed, but because they had nowhere else to go. They curled up in her belly like fists. They collected behind her eyes like heavy stones. She didn't have the strength to cry anymore. Or maybe the tears understood finally that they changed nothing. Her stepmother hated the silence too, though. "You sulk like a witch," the woman spat one day after throwing a bucket at her for scrubbing too slowly. "Don't think that little humming of yours hides it. I hear it. That nasty little tune." But the tune wasn't nasty. It was the only thing she remembered clearly from before her mother died. A lullaby, soft and low, the kind of song meant to be sung with a hand on your head and a kiss on your brow. It had no words, only rhythm. A ripple of peace that echoed from somewhere far behind her memory. She hummed it when her knees gave out. When her arms shook from scrubbing walls no one even looked at. When the ashes from the cooking pit were dumped on the floors for her to clean. When visitors came and stared and pointed and laughed. She hummed it so softly that it was more breath than sound. So softly that even the house barely noticed. But the stepmother noticed. And that meant punishment. Once, the woman pulled her by the hair and dragged her outside, yelling loud enough for the whole street to hear. "She's possessed. She's humming spirits into this house." Another time, she locked the girl in the goat shed overnight with no blanket and nothing to eat but a bowl of lukewarm water. Still the girl hummed. Because when you can't cry and you can't scream and you can't speak, there has to be something left. Even if it's just a thread of melody you don't understand but remember in your bones. She never fought back. Even when her scalp peeled and itched. Even when the sores formed. Even when the merchant with the red beard threw his muddy boot at her and said, "Your hair is too short to be worth cleaning anything anymore." Even when the stepmother called her useless, again and again, like the word itself was a kind of whip. She did not cry. She had already given them her voice. She would not give them her pain too. At night, she sometimes pressed her face to the cool floor and listened. Beneath the house, beneath the stones and wood and roots, the earth was alive. It rumbled in tiny ways. A beetle scuttling. A seed splitting open. A worm tunneling. She imagined the lullaby seeping through the floorboards and into the dirt, winding its way to her mother. Maybe if she hummed it long enough, the earth would hum it back. One morning, her sister, her stepmother's daughter, not quite older but louder, pointed at the clumps of hair falling from her head. "She looks like a dying chicken," the girl laughed, mouth full of plantain. "I bet if we plucked her bald, she'd still try to bow." Their father didn't laugh. He didn't speak at all. He only kept chewing, his eyes on the pot, his hands twitching slightly. Later, in the evening when everyone else had left the kitchen, he walked in and tossed a coin on the table. "For your hair," he said. She looked up slowly. "To buy what?" "Something to tie it up." "You look disgraceful." She didn't touch the coin. She waited until he left, then brushed it off the table with her elbow. She knew better than to hope for softness from him. He had made his choice long ago, when her mother's funeral was still fresh in the air and he stood beside the new wife with dry eyes. But still, there were moments when he watched her and didn't look away fast enough. As if some ancient guilt clawed at the edge of his throat. She didn't want his guilt. She wanted not to be touched anymore. She wanted not to be stepped on. She wanted her hair to belong to her. One night, she dreamed that the roots of her hair reached deep into the ground while she slept. In the dream they grew past worms and water veins, past buried bones and broken jars. They wrapped around something soft and pulsing. And it hummed back. When she woke, there were petals in her bed. Real ones. Soft red petals, tucked beneath her ear and resting near her bruised fingers. She didn't tell anyone. Let them laugh. Let them spit. She had stopped crying. But the song was still in her. And someday, she thought, when the ground hummed loud enough, someone might finally listen. The morning was cruel as usual. The kind of cruel that didn't need shouting. The kind that began in silence. Bread left uneaten on the high table, buckets placed just far enough to make her crawl, glances sharp enough to flay skin. She had already scrubbed the courtyard twice. The red dust had no end. It returned with every breeze as if the land itself conspired to humiliate her. Her fingers were raw. Her arms ached. Her hair, matted and short now, clung to her damp neck as she knelt and began again, scrubbing the floor with what strands she had left, because rags were a luxury, and her body was her only tool. The neighbors watched. They always watched. Children giggled behind their mothers' wrappers. Young men sneered from where they leaned against walls. And the women, they didn't bother hiding their smirks anymore. They loved a spectacle. But then he arrived. He wasn't from the village. That much was clear. His robes were too fine, his eyes too quiet. A man who moved without needing to prove anything. A traveler from the east, they whispered, passing through on his way to the next town where the festival drums were louder. He didn't speak for a long time. Just stood at the edge of the square watching her. Not with hunger. Not with pity. Just watching. She kept her head down. She had learned never to meet strangers' eyes. It invited trouble. It invited laughter. But this man didn't laugh. When she knelt by his feet, waiting for the signal, because that's what she was supposed to do, wait for the boot to stretch out so she could begin wiping it with the ends of her hair, he didn't move. His feet stayed tucked beneath him. His hands remained folded across his lap. She looked up just briefly through the curtain of her hair. His eyes met hers. And he did something no one else had done in years. He asked her name. She didn't answer. She couldn't. Her tongue was thick. Her throat dry. The sound of her name had long become something she kept hidden, buried beneath layers of silence and ash. So she shook her head. He didn't push. He simply looked down at the blood-stained edges of her hair, then at the bruises beneath her knees and then back at her face. And then, without a word, he bent, reached into his robe and placed a silver coin on the floor between them. Not in her hand. Not thrown. Not tossed into the dust. Placed gently, deliberately, as if he were leaving something sacred. Then he stood, nodded once and walked away. She stayed frozen, her hands still on the stones, her breath shallow. The women across the street whispered sharply. The men chuckled, calling him foolish. The children lost interest and chased a goat. but she just stared at the coin. It gleamed even in the shade. Not like the other coins she had seen, dull copper or cheap brass. This one caught the sun in its ridges. It was etched with markings she didn't recognize. Foreign, elegant, and heavier than it looked. She didn't touch it for a long time. When the stepmother came out and saw it, she rushed over, eyes wide. "Who gave you this?" she hissed. The girl didn't answer. The woman slapped her hard across the temple, but still she said nothing. "It's mine," the woman said, grabbing it up, tucking it into her blouse like it had always belonged there. "Anything given to you belongs to this house." The girl didn't fight. She simply looked at the ground where the coin had been, as if it had burned a mark into the stones. That night, she lay awake, staring at the ceiling, not thinking of the slap, not thinking of the stolen coin, but of the man's eyes, the way he had seen her. Not as a joke, not as a stain, but as something worth asking a name. She hummed the lullaby softly into the dark, and for the first time her voice didn't tremble. Somewhere in the east she imagined he was walking again, and she wondered if he'd look back. That evening the sky was a dull iron sheet, thick and silent as if it too was holding its breath. The girl had just finished scrubbing the front steps with her fraying hair, knuckles raw, knees stung with old gravel. The sun had gone down, but her work didn't stop with the dark. She knew the rules. She was not to rise from her crouch until the stepmother stepped outside, inspected the stone for dust, and clicked her tongue in false satisfaction. Tonight, the woman didn't inspect anything. She stood on the doorstep with something curled in her hand, a bundle of straw and bone. No, not straw. The girl squinted. She knew that shape too well. Her comb. The one her mother had carved long ago, when the girl had been too young to even part her own hair. It was nothing grand, just a thick wooden handle shaped like a crescent moon, its teeth wide, smoothened by years of oil and rhythm. But it had been hers. The only thing in the house she had dared to keep hidden, buried beneath a loose floorboard beside the fireplace. The stepmother must have found it. She held it up like it was something dirty. "So this is what you cling to like a dog with a buried bone," she spat. "You think you're entitled to pride?" The girl said nothing. Her scalp still ached from the last beating. The back of her head had a fresh bald patch where hair had fallen out in clumps. The woman descended the stairs slowly, dramatically. Behind her, the fire pit glowed faintly, waiting. The comb was thrown in without ceremony. The flames hissed, catching on old oil stains and old memories. The scent rose like incense, burnt wood, scorched oil, and something older. Her mother's hands. Her mother's humming. Her mother's voice saying, asterisk, "Hold still, my star, let me bless your roots." Asterisk. "You are nothing," the stepmother said, standing close now. "You hear me? Nothing but a rag. A girl with shame for hair, shame for silence. Don't think your cursed roots make you special." The girl didn't cry. Not anymore. Instead, she watched the fire eat the comb down to ash. She watched the flames dance. And then she turned and went inside. Her mat was the same, rough reed, still damp from last week's storm, pushed to the far corner of the kitchen like an afterthought. She lay down without washing, without eating, without speaking. And in the dark, the fire still burned behind her eyes. That night she dreamed. She was standing in a field where the ground was warm and breathing. Her feet didn't hurt. Her knees weren't scraped. Her hair trailed behind her in long, coiled rivers, clean and black as the night sky. A woman stood in the center of the field, facing the moon. She had skin like ironwood and eyes like dusk. She wore no jewelry, no shoes. But her presence, her posture, was regal in a way the girl remembered with her bones. "Come here," the woman said gently. The girl did not speak, but her feet moved on their own. The woman sat on a rock, a large bowl of golden oil beside her. The girl knelt. Without a word, the woman began to comb through her hair, long, soft strokes that pulled no pain, only warmth. "My daughter," she said, "your roots are older than this roof, older than their rules, older than fire." The girl closed her eyes. The oil smelled of myrrh and lemons. The woman's fingers were calloused and kind. "Do you remember when I first braided your hair?" the woman asked. The girl shook her head slowly. "You were only 3. You screamed like a lion. But once I finished, you refused to take it out. For days you wore that braid like it was a crown." The girl smiled. In the dream it didn't hurt to smile. "They made you forget," the woman whispered, placing a kiss on her forehead. "But your scalp remembers. Your blood remembers." She poured the last of the oil along the girl's parting. It glowed. It seeped in. The heat was not scalding but radiant, like something waking up inside her. And then, The field cracked. Flames erupted from the soil like flowers. The woman stood, her robes flaring like wings. Behind her, the moon split in two, and light poured down in streams the color of fire. "When the time comes," the woman said, voice now deeper, almost echoing, "you must not bow." The girl blinked. Time for what? The woman smiled, though her eyes now burned gold. For silence to end. The fire roared around them. The trees leaned forward, listening. Then the dream fell apart. She woke gasping. The kitchen was dark. Cold ash curled from the hearth. But something was different. The girl sat up. Her hair, what remained of it, was dry, but her scalp tingled like it had just been washed. Her fingers touched something wet near her hairline. She brought them forward and stared. Oh, thick, golden, fragrant. She looked toward the window. The night outside pulsed like a slow breath. Somewhere in the woods, something cracked like a tree bowing. Her stepmother snored softly in the next room. The girl didn't move for a long time. She just sat there, the scent of lemons curling in her nostrils, her fingers brushing lightly through strands that no longer stung. She whispered to herself low so even the walls couldn't hear. "My roots are older than this roof." And the fire in the hearth twitched, even though no wood had been added. That morning when the stepmother awoke, she noticed the smell in the air, something sweet, strange, ancient. She looked at the girl and felt something sharp beneath her ribs. She said nothing. But that day she did not speak a single order. And that night the girl dreamt again. But this time it was not the mother who called her. It was the earth. It was another dry morning, the kind where the dust hangs in the air before the sun even rises. The girl was on her knees again as always, a wooden bowl in one hand and her chin near the floor, scrubbing where the soot from last night's fire had gathered. Her back ached, her fingers cracked, but her breath was steady. She hummed softly, almost inaudibly, the lullaby her mother used to hum when oiling her hair long ago. The house was full of guests, men from the nearby hill, gathered for a village hearing. Her stepmother, eager to please, had ordered her to work in the main room, where all their feet could dirty the floors she would scrub clean again. The girl didn't argue. She never did anymore. But this morning something in the air felt different. Tighter. Charged. She noticed it when the second man spat too close to her arm, and the spit stopped mid-air, hanging for a moment like caught in a thread, then dropped soundlessly to the side, missing her completely. He blinked, rubbed his eyes, then turned away quickly. But the third man didn't turn away. He watched her with the same sneer the others had worn for months. A broad-shouldered man with cracked teeth and wine on his breath, he pointed at her hair and laughed loudly. "What is this, still growing like weeds?" he barked. "I'll trim it myself." The other men chuckled. She kept scrubbing. He took a step forward. His sandals dragged against the packed earth. Then, deliberately, he moved to place his heel on the tail of her hair that trailed behind her on the ground like a fallen banner. He lifted his foot, and the hair moved. Not as if pulled by wind. Not like anything natural. It rose, smoothly, silently, just an inch at first, slipping away from the reach of his foot like it had a mind of its own. The man froze, foot hovering. The others stopped laughing. The hair swayed. He lunged again, angry now, stamping forward to crush it underfoot. It didn't move away this time. It rose. Faster. Up like a curtain drawn by unseen hands. It whipped behind her like smoke, then surged forward, around the man's legs. He had just enough time to scream before the strands tightened. Around both ankles. Around his knees. They lifted him, not high but enough for his body to flail uselessly in the air, face down, arms scrambling. The bowl in her hands clattered to the floor. The girl didn't move. She didn't even blink. Her hair held him. The other men were on their feet, shouting. Someone knocked over a stool. Another scrambled for the door, nearly falling over. One yelled, "Witch. She's a witch." But the girl stood now, slowly rising to her full height. Her hair floated behind her, alive. It didn't just move with the air, it created its own. The wind in the room changed. It felt heavy and electric, thick like summer lightning. The man still dangling began to sob. "I didn't mean it," he whimpered. "Please, what are you?" The girl looked at him, eyes calm and unreadable. She didn't speak. But her hair answered. It dropped him, not hard, just enough to let him feel it. His knees hit the floor. He scrambled away on all fours, weeping. The hair didn't follow. It curled around the girl now, gently brushing against her back, her arms, her waist, like a pet returning to its master. Like something older than skin. Older than shame. She turned toward the others. No one stepped forward. Not one man remained inside. Even her stepmother, watching from the corner of the kitchen, had backed away, her lips parted in horror. The girl didn't smile. She simply turned and walked back to the hearth. Her hair rippled behind her like the end of a storm cloud, trailing soot and ash in its wake, but never collecting any. She knelt, picked up the wooden bowl, and began scrubbing again. The house had never been quiet before, not really. It always breathed with noise, laughter that wasn't kind, footsteps that weren't soft, commands that came without kindness. But now, in the wake of the morning's horror, there was silence. The girl stood in the center of the room, a pool of water still dark on the floor where the bowl had overturned. Her hair coiled around her like a black sea beast, glossy and shifting, responding not to wind but to will. Her stepmother stood at the doorway, a wooden spoon in one hand and rage on her face. "What have you done?" she spat. The girl didn't answer. "You've shamed this house," the woman hissed, stepping closer. "Shame me? You think you've become someone? You think hair makes you a queen?" The girl blinked slowly, and the hair swayed behind her, like a curtain waiting for thunder. Her stepmother raised the spoon high, and swung. It never landed. The strands shot upward, faster than thought, meeting the wood mid-air and cracking it in half with a sound like breaking bone. The stepmother gasped and stumbled back. The hair did not stop. It rose above the girl now, wide as wings and trembling with a low hum, a sound the walls seemed to respond to. The rafters groaned. The cooking pots trembled. The windows, sealed with grime for years, let in a gust of warm, golden wind. The stepmother's fury dissolved into fear. "This is witchcraft," she whispered. "This is your mother's filth. I should have burned every part of her out of you." The girl's gaze didn't waver. Her feet took one step forward. Then another. The hair didn't strike again. It didn't need to. With each step the girl took, the house seemed to exhale. Dust rose. Walls creaked. Something old and bitter loosened from the corners of the roof. She passed her stepmother in silence, and the woman flinched as if scorched. At the threshold the girl paused. The light outside was soft and golden. The sun had risen higher. The village was beginning to stir. But she didn't look back. She didn't ask permission. She didn't kneel to clean anything before she left. She simply walked out. And the door closed behind her, not with a slam, but with the heavy breath of something ending. No one saw her for a long time after that. Not in the village. Not in the market. Not even near the river where girls gathered to wash clothes and tell stories. Some said she fled into the forest. Others claimed she'd turned to smoke. Her stepmother swore she had died in the woods, swallowed by whatever demons had possessed her hair. But then the stories began. Soft at first, like echoes in the night. In the southern village, a girl who scrubbed the temple floors for years claimed she woke one morning with her hands healed and her hair long again, after dreaming of a woman with living braids. In the east, a father tried to force his daughter to wash a guest's feet with her own braids, but the strands refused to obey. They tangled, then turned on him. The girl said she'd heard a whisper that night telling her, "Roots remember." In a town by the cliffs, a girl beaten for standing too tall found her head protected by something she couldn't see. Her stepmother's hand broke when it tried to strike her. That girl dreamed of black strands and golden oil and a lullaby hummed by a faceless woman. And always there was the whisper. "She comes when the floor's too dirty with shame. When the knees of a girl know more pain than rest. She comes." They called her different names. The hair that walks. The root queen. The daughter of dust. But most often they called her she who washes no more. They said she wore her hair like a cape now, long enough to sweep the roads clean as she passed. That where her feet touched the earth, the soil grew soft. That you didn't see her, not unless your pain was real. Not unless your hair had been used to mop up someone else's cruelty. And when she came, she didn't speak. She didn't knock. She simply entered the room where a girl was kneeling too long, and stood behind her until the girl lifted her head. Then the hair moved. Gently. Powerfully. Lifting the girl. Untangling what had been tangled. And always, the sound of a lullaby in the air, the kind only a mother could have taught. Some say if you leave a comb by the fire and whisper your own name into the ashes, she'll hear you. And if your suffering has roots, she'll come. Not to clean the floor, but to set your head free.